I didn't realize how fast a person can lose themselves until I caught my own reflection one morning and barely recognized the expression staring back. It wasn't sadness or anger. It was a kind of quiet exhaustion, the kind that settles into your bones after months of being slowly pushed, pulled, and chipped away by someone who claims they care about you. That was the first moment I admitted something in my life was off, not broken yet, but leaning. My everyday life back then was simple. I worked at a small neighborhood hardware store, came home around 5, made dinner, watched whatever rerun was playing, and tried to keep things calm. My girlfriend Laura said she liked stable men, and I took pride in being one. I thought it meant steady, reliable, a partner you could build a normal life with. What I didn't understand was that to her, stable meant predictable, malleable, easy to rearrange. It started with small corrections. She'd point out the way I folded laundry and laugh like it was cute that I couldn't do it the right way. Then she'd reorganize shelves I had just cleaned, insisting she was helping. When I cooked dinner, she'd hover behind me, quietly moving spices I'd just set down, replacing salt with her preferred brand, or giving tiny sighs when I didn't chop vegetables her way. I kept brushing it off as quirks. Everyone has quirks, but hers weren't random. They formed a pattern, a rhythm, a slow tightening around every part of my routine until I started second-guessing myself over things I'd done confidently for years. The first real warning sign happened during a Sunday breakfast. I'd made pancakes, something I'd done since I was a teenager. She took one bite, set her fork down, and said, "You know it's fine, but my ex used to make them fluffier." She didn't say it to hurt me. She said it like she was offering me advice, as if I should thank her. I laughed it off, but it stuck with me the whole day. Still, I tried harder the next weekend, and she nodded approvingly like a teacher grading a student. Somehow I felt relieved. That feeling should have concerned me more than the comment itself. Over the next month, she began inserting herself into every decision. What I wore, how I styled my hair, how I arranged my schedule, which friends I should distance myself from because they were too negative. Each suggestion was wrapped in soft tones and faux concern. "I just want what's best for you. You trust me, right? I'm only saying this because I care." I didn't want conflict, so I went along with things that didn't matter to me. But then she started pushing into things that did. One night I planned to visit my sister, who'd just had a rough week. Laura told me she needed me to stay home because she didn't feel centered and needed emotional support. When I hesitated, she asked if I was accusing her of being selfish. I apologized somehow and stayed home. My sister didn't say anything, but I could feel her disappointment through the phone. That's how Laura worked, not through shouting or demands, but through carefully placed guilt, soft disappointment, tiny insinuations that made me feel like I was always one decision away from letting her down. By the time fall rolled around, she'd managed to quietly thread herself through every corner of my life. I dismissed it as relationship compromise, but something in my chest stayed tight, constantly tight. The real turning point came the day she suggested, sweetly of course, that I give her a spare key, since we're basically living together anyway. Except we weren't. She stayed over a lot, sure, but that wasn't the same. Still, she smiled, brushed her hand over mine, and said, "It'll help us feel more connected." The word connected echoed strangely in my mind. Not warm, not reassuring, just binding. And for the first time, I felt a quiet flicker of unease beneath her gentle tone. A suspicion that whatever was happening between us wasn't compromise at all, but control. And if I didn't start paying closer attention, I might wake up one morning and find there was nothing left in my life that actually belonged to me. The weeks after the spare key conversation felt different, sharper, like someone had adjusted the lighting in my life, making details I'd ignored stand out in uncomfortable clarity. I didn't give her the key right away, and she didn't press, but her disappointment hung in the air like humidity. Every time I hesitated over something she wanted, her expression would shift. Soft, wounded, patient in a way that made me feel like I'd kicked a stray dog. That guilt became her favorite tool. It showed up when I visited my sister again. Laura didn't argue this time. She just went quiet. When I came home, she barely spoke. Eventually, when I asked what was wrong, she murmured, "Nothing. I'm just learning to live with your priorities." The way she said it made my chest tighten with a wave of shame I couldn't explain. I started noticing how she reframed every disagreement to make herself the victim. If I offered a different opinion about something as small as a movie, she'd tilt her head and say, "Wow, I thought you respected my tastes." If I disagreed about weekend plans, she'd sigh, "I guess what I want doesn't matter today." Never threats, never anger. Just disappointment so consistent and precise it felt engineered. The breaking point, though, came wrapped in something that looked harmless. My coworker Ed was having a little cookout for his birthday. I'd known the guy for years, salt of the earth type. He invited both of us. Laura smiled politely when I mentioned it, but later asked, almost casually, "Do you really think I fit in with those people?" I told her yes, of course. She smiled again, then called the gathering low-effort backyard stuff and said it wasn't our vibe. I said I'd just go alone for an hour. That's when she got quiet, not angry, quiet in that heavy way that made my stomach drop. "Do whatever makes you happy," she said. 4 hours later, I returned home to her sitting on my couch with red eyes and a tissue box. She'd just been thinking and felt like she wasn't important enough for me to choose her over random social events. She insisted she wasn't accusing me of anything. She just wished she mattered more. She said it so softly, so earnestly, that I sat down beside her, feeling like I'd abandoned her, like I'd done something truly wrong. That night, I apologized 3 separate times without even knowing what I was apologizing for. And that's when the manipulation finally snapped into focus. It wasn't about pancakes or shelves or weekend plans. It was about control. Subtle, emotional, relentless control. She shaped my choices by shaping my guilt. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just had to make me feel responsible for every imaginary hurt she conjured. A few days later, I caught her going through my dresser drawers while I was in the shower. When I stepped out, she didn't even act embarrassed. She said she was organizing because I never do it right. Something inside me twisted hard. She saw nothing wrong with it, because in her mind, everything of mine was already hers to manage. That night, while she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and realized I was living in a maze she'd built, one quiet suggestion at a time. And I was done. Not with screaming, not with dramatic ultimatums, just done being managed like a project she was slowly redesigning. If she could twist my routines that easily, then she could twist narratives too. So if I wanted out, cleanly, safely, and without giving her a chance to spin the story, I needed to move with the same quiet precision she used. I wasn't planning revenge yet, but I was planning distance. And distance, I knew, was the first step toward getting my life back. The first thing I did was stop giving her reactions. No pushback, no apologies, no visible frustration she could mold into guilt. I answered her comments with calm neutrality, a tone so flat she couldn't twist it. At first, she didn't notice. She kept correcting how I stirred a pot or how I folded a towel, but my lack of response threw off her rhythm. She needed emotional tension to tighten her grip, and I stopped supplying it. Next, I quietly rebuilt parts of my life she'd drained. I reconnected with my sister, spent more time helping Ed at the hardware store, and even lingered after closing to chat with a couple of the regulars. Nothing major, just moments of connection that reminded me what normal felt like. Every time I came home a little lighter, Laura would scan my face like she was searching for evidence of disobedience. "Did you miss me?" she'd ask. I always answered gently, "Of course," but not with the over-eager reassurance she expected. That's when the real shift began. She started testing boundaries, moving my belongings to new places to help, leaving notes about chores I'd forgotten, asking why I needed to stay late when the hardware store closed at the same time every evening. Each question was dipped in honey, but the suspicion underneath was sharp. Then she asked for the key again. This time I didn't hesitate. I told her I wasn't comfortable giving anyone access when I wasn't home, not even her. I said it calmly, plainly, and left no space for guilt to grow. Her smile tightened. "I just want us to feel connected," she repeated, but the softness had faded. I didn't argue. I simply held her gaze until she looked away. That moment told me everything. She realized she was losing traction, so she escalated. One Friday, she accidentally ran into one of my neighbors and introduced herself as the person who basically lives here. The neighbor mentioned it later with a laugh. My stomach sank, claiming territory, establishing her version of the relationship publicly, framing herself as the default partner, so if things fell apart, she could paint me as unstable or unreliable. That's when quiet distance shifted into quiet strategy. I started documenting small things. Not obsessively, just enough to protect myself. A photo of my drawers before she reorganized them. A screenshot of a text where she guilted me for seeing my sister. Notes on dates she'd shown up unannounced. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Then I slowly shifted her involvement out of my home. I made sure I was busy on days she usually came over. When she asked to stay the night, I explained I needed sleep for an early shift. I rarely initiated hangouts. I stopped leaving space in my schedule she could claim. What surprised me most was how fast the cracks formed. Without control, she grew impatient. Without guilt to cling to, she grew sharper. She began making snide comments about my friends. They're not really your crowd. Then about my clothes. You used to dress better when you listened to me. Then about my routines. You're slipping again. But each jab only confirmed what I already knew. She needed me to be smaller so she could feel larger. One evening when she dropped by without warning and found me reading on the couch, she asked if she could come in. I stepped outside instead, closing the door behind me. Her eyes widened. She wasn't used to boundaries she couldn't step around. I feel like you're shutting me out, she whispered. I'm keeping my space, I answered quietly. That's all. Her expression flickered into something cold before she smoothed it over. That was the moment I knew she wouldn't back down. She would try to reclaim control, which meant it was time to finish what I started. Revenge didn't mean ruining her life. It meant removing her from mine completely, in a way she couldn't spin, twist, or worm her way back into. And I knew exactly how to do it. I waited for a moment when she felt confident again, because confidence made her careless. It came sooner than I expected. One Wednesday evening, she showed up with dinner as a surprise and stepping inside before I could stop her. She walked through my place like she still owned parts of it, rearranging coasters, straightening picture frames, opening cabinets, just to check what you're running low on. But this time, I didn't try to guide her out gently. I watched. Everything she touched, everything she commented on, every little attempt to reassert control, I let it happen, calmly, quietly, because I already had what I needed. When she finally sat across from me at the table, smiling like things were back on track, I told her we needed to talk. Her smile froze, but she kept it on her face like a mask. I explained slowly and with complete steadiness that the relationship wasn't healthy for me anymore. I told her I needed space, independence, and autonomy, things that had been chipped away piece by piece. I told her I wouldn't be continuing the relationship. She stared at me like she was waiting for the punchline. Then the smile dropped. You're confused, she said. This is just a rough patch. You always get emotional when you're tired. I didn't react. I just repeated clearly and calmly. We're done. She tried every tactic she had. Minimizing, guilt, wounded confusion, quiet accusations. She asked if I'd been talked into this by my sister. She asked if Ed had been poisoning me against her. She claimed she'd been planning a future with me. She shifted blame in ways I'd heard 100 times before, but none of the hooks landed. When she realized the manipulation wasn't working, she tried a new angle. If you're ending this, she said, voice cold, I deserve closure. We should go through everything that's gone wrong so we can both understand what really happened. And that's where the revenge unfolded. Not loud, not vindictive, but clear and undeniable. I pulled out my small notebook and set it gently on the table. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of it. Inside were dates, patterns, examples, each one written down without emotion or embellishment. I didn't accuse. I didn't dramatize. I simply showed her, piece by piece, what her behavior looked like from the outside. Her face shifted from defensive to stunned to furious as she realized every tiny suggestion, every guilt-laced comment, every quiet intrusion into my life had been seen. Not exaggerated, not twisted, just seen. She tried to argue with the first few entries, but the more she protested, the more obvious it became how carefully these moments lined up. Her own words, documented exactly as she'd said them, boxed her in. She wasn't used to losing control of the narrative. "This isn't fair," she whispered, voice trembling with something between anger and fear. "It's honest," I said, "and that's why it's over." She left quickly after that, barely looking at me as she walked out the door. No dramatic goodbye, no tearful apology, just a tight, furious silence. The next day, she texted a paragraph blaming stress, her childhood, her job, her friends, everyone but herself. I didn't engage. I simply responded, "I wish you well, but I'm moving on." Then I blocked her number and her social media. For weeks, she circled around my life through mutual acquaintances, testing whether I'd crack. I never did. My story of the breakup was simple and consistent. We weren't good for each other. I needed boundaries. No drama, no details, nothing she could twist, and without access to my reactions, she had nothing left to manipulate. The fallout wasn't explosive, it was quiet. People saw her defensiveness and agitation. They saw my calm. Over time, the difference spoke for itself. As for me, I rebuilt slowly. I filled my apartment with things she'd pushed aside. I reconnected with friends without guilt hanging like a shadow. I spent evenings with my sister, laughing freely instead of checking my phone every few minutes. The lesson I took from all of it was simple but heavy. Manipulation doesn't always arrive as control. Sometimes it arrives as concern, as softness, as someone slowly asking you to shrink so they can feel bigger. Revenge for me wasn't about hurting her. It was about reclaiming myself. And walking away, quietly, clearly, unmistakably, was the most powerful thing I've ever done.